Chapter 5. He wasn't going out like that. No Samsa werewolf would lie there while he had strength and not fight for life. That was all he had now, his life, and he would put up one last fight. He found the strength to drag his upper body along, using his powerful arms to propel him. When he glanced forward looking at the opening of the cave, he had gone only a few feet. The mouth of the cave appeared closer, but because he was weak, it felt as if it would take all day to make it to the outside. Each move more painful than the next. He stopped to catch his breath and to raise his head and give out a howl. Maybe someone would hear him. The only answer came back was that of a lone wolf in a distance. Not a werewolf, but a wolf that could take advantage of his inability to stand upright and an obvious weakness. He was helpless and food for a pack of wolves. One painful inch after the other, Justin crawled with the help of his hands and arms until he reached the mouth of the cave. When he lay at its opening and he could see out at miles of white snow and large pines and what looked like a clearing, he let out a werewolf's cry. The sound of animals scrambling to get to their hiding place could be heard throughout the forest, with the understanding that the ultimate predator was somewhere near. There were a few wolves in the area by the cries coming out at a distance, but not werewolves. There probably hadn't been any werewolves in Virginia, if he was in Virginia, for years. At least that was the official word from the council that his father and uncles had presided over. Father should be here by now once he discovers I'm missing. And the plane hasn't returned to the hangar. But how would he know? What day is it? Justin questioned. How long have I been here? He looked up and saw a full moon. It was almost the end of the month. I've been here about a week or more, he murmured. Oh great. Now I'm talking to myself. That's all I need is to lose my mind before I die, he thought. Realizing what he said, he panicked and tried to push back the snow, digging with his hands until they were frozen. In his weakened state, he realized it would take forever. Then it dawned on him that maybe he could change into his werewolf state. It would take more energy than he had, but if he didn't, then what chance did he have in the condition he was in? He blinked his eyes and thought. Justin couldn't hunt now, and he couldn't remember the last time he ate. Gathering his breath and energy, he tried shifting. But nothing happened. Breathless from trying over and over, he remembered how carelessly he had taken the lessons his father tried teaching him about shifting. Thinking that he didn't need to learn to shift, he felt that it would come naturally, and anyway, he didn't think it was necessary anymore. That was his family's life, and it would never become his because he was a city werewolf, more man than wolf. There were no werewolves in the city but his brother and him. When would he need it? He soon learned that he needed to shift when he had to protect Hannah from the warlock. Then when he needed to use that part of himself, it had come natural, but it came because of being in great physical shape, which caused his body to change into another form. Now he was no longer physical, nor was he well enough to pull that feat off. Turning around slowly and resigning himself to a death, he crawled back to rocks and dry leaves that had been his bed, and he curled up in a ball giving into his fate. Through the fever he heard his father's voice. Are you giving up, my son? We Samsas never give up. You're a werewolf. You are part human and part wolf. That means something. You're stronger and more capable than any human. Get up and try again. Opening his eyes, Justin searched around for his father, but he wasn't there. He hadn't been there. Now I'm hallucinating. That's just fucked up. I can't even die in peace. I have my father in my head, he said, whispering into the dark, dank cave. Father, leave me to die in peace. I can't live with my leg the way it is. Don't touch it. You're hurting me. His voice weak but firm. You're such a baby. Let me pour this on you, and then put ointment on your wound and wrap it. Haven't you ever stepped in a trap before? Justin opened his eyes and looked up. Standing over him looking down at him was a young woman with dark hair cut short, almost like a boy. Her eyes a deep pool of blue. Her lips plump with a natural pink color. "No, I've never," he said with a surprised tone. She stooped near him. "What were you doing in these woods with nothing on your body, in this snow? Don't you know better? No one but a fool would venture around thick woods dressed like that. What are you, and does that plane I came across belong to you?" she asked as she reached into her pouch and pulled out a bottle of dark black liquid. "What is that?" Justin said, holding onto her wrist. She pulled back her arm and proceeded to pour it. He realized how weak he had become. There wasn't a female who could match the strength of a young werewolf. That is only if he were dying. "Just a concoction I put together. It will heal your leg." She poured the thick black gooey liquid over his ankle. He opened his mouth and let out a chilling wolf call. It was like a scream that would never end. She quickly put her hand to his mouth. "Shut up if you don't want the wolves in here, and they would take no pity on me or you. They're hungry because of the late snow. They would eat us in one bite. The wolves in this area are large as men, and there are lots of them. They hunt in packs of 12. That's why I put those traps out. To keep their numbers down and to keep them from overtaking me," she said, watching at Justin as she rubbed some ointment on his leg and then tore a piece of her shirt from under her down jacket to bandage it. "You should be fine, but it will take some time for you to heal. When you're ready to walk on that leg, then we can go to my cabin." "I have to leave now," Justin said, making a feeble attempt to get up. She pushed him down. "If you don't give yourself a chance to heal, then you will never walk on that leg again, and a handsome man like you don't want to be a gimp. You know, dragging a leg behind you as you walk up to ask a girl to marry you." She gave out a wide smile as if it was a joke. But it wasn't a joke to Justin. There was too much reality wrapped in that sentence. He had to return to Hannah soon and make his case for her to marry him before Jovani had a chance to find them. After a week sick in a cave and out of his mind, he wondered what had become of Hannah. Justin hoped that she didn't think he had deserted her. He never would. Not now and not ever. As long as he had breath, he would be there for her. But he wasn't there for her, and neither was Jovani around for what would happen next to Hannah. Chapter 6. Lycell had gone to Afghanistan as a favor to Wilder. Wilder agreed that he would take a trip there to see how he could aid the soldiers. After toying with the notion of running for governor of Nevada, Wilder would have to leave Adrian and his responsibilities at home when Adrian needed him after the kidnapping of Hunter. Therefore, Wilder asked Lycell to take his place. Not wanting to go because he too wanted to be near Adrian to comfort her, but knowing that her firstborn son to Wilder was in jeopardy, he relented, and nonetheless he agreed. It was there he came across Jovani. Lycell's helicopter had gone down, killing everyone aboard except him. He was cut off from soldiers who would protect him. He found himself alone in a small deserted village, and making his way into a shell of a house, he stood face to face with a vampire and his prey. "What are you doing here, vampire?" Lycell said. "No, don't tell me. You expected to collect easy food. You're not satisfied stalking your prey anymore. Have you become too lazy and too rich to do that?" Jovani turned, dropping the half-dead corpse, and glared at Lycell standing encircled with bloody bodies, with blood dripping from his long fingernails and razor-like incisors, where he had pierced the necks of the ones still alive at that time, and drained them. Wiping his arm across his bloody mouth, cleaning away the signs of a carnage, Jovani said to Lycell, "I could ask the same of you, werewolf, but I won't because I know. I'm here to make amends for the destruction and pain I've caused. I've cleared the town of the women and children. Taken them across the border and to hospitals." Pointing to the men lying around his feet, he continued, "These were here to kill the women and children." "That's what you want me to believe." "I don't care what you believe, wolf. Lycell's brow narrowed when he called him a wolf. That was an insult. You need to be near the blood. That's what you do. You're addicted to the smell and sight of blood. If it's there, you will be somewhere near. You can try to pretend that you have another motive, but I know you for what you are, Lycell said, his voice filled with contempt for Jovani. I don't need blood. Not human blood. Not anymore. Lycell huffed and laughed, walking away, putting distance between them. He wanted to be sure that he could shift and leap toward Jovani, if necessary. Lycell, in a fighting shifting stance, legs apart, eyes focused, said, That's like saying I don't need fresh meat and water to live. If we're going to BS each other, then we either end it here, or we work together to get out of this mess. The sun is fast approaching, and we need each other. I can't handle alone what's coming, and you have to find a place to sleep. I know where there's a cave not far from here. He pointed. Jovani didn't know if he could trust Lycell, but he had no choice. The same was true of Lycell. The first thought in Lycell's mind when they reached the cave was to kill him because he couldn't trust a bloodthirsty immortal, especially since they were enemies from the beginning of their existence. It had been Jovani's kind, bloodthirsty vampires who had led the humans to track down the werewolves across Europe, all the while they posed the greatest threat to humankind. The vampires ravaged Europe and then the Middle East during the First World War as they swept through the desert towns under the disguise of war, where millions died at the hands of vampires than from the instruments of war. Vampires were the true instruments of war. Killing one vampire could save thousands of lives, Lycell thought, watching at Jovani sleeping in the deepest part of the cave. Observing Jovani as he slept peacefully and vulnerable gave him the idea that he should do it now before night. At night, Jovani would be stronger. Now he appeared to be defenseless. But he dismissed that notion because he didn't know how long he would need Jovani. He wanted to get home to Adrian more than he wanted to help humans. What had they done for the werewolves but hunt them into almost extinction, he thought, as he placed the wooden stake into his backpack. He needed to get back home to his sons and his pregnant woman, Adrian, his wife and his mate. Lycell kept watch during the day and most of the night. Only partly sleeping. Jovani would wander around but never leave the cave. Lycell worried because Jovani had become emaciated from lack of food. If he was starving, he would pose a threat to Lycell. To any warm body with blood pumping. He needed this immortal, and besides, he had taken precautions to carry silver. Around his neck, he wore a silver cross, and on his wrist, Adrian had given him a Navajo silver bracelet and ring. Aware of their hunger, they both needed food and water, therefore, they left the cave at night to venture into the nearest town, hoping to return with fresh meat and water. But on entering the town, they were ambushed by the local tribes and had to fight their way out. Shortly after the bloodbath, where they both worked together to destroy their enemies, Lycell and Jovani parted their ways, and Lycell never thought about him or that meeting again until he discovered Jovani and his son were captivated by the same woman. Once again, Lycell came across Jovani, and this time he thought nothing of destroying him. He didn't need him as much now. He could find Justin on his own. All he wanted was answers from Jovani, or the young woman his son had become infatuated with. As he watched them sleep, he thought he could bring an end to Jovani, but he would have to kill the girl first as she lay on his chest. Lycell saw his opportunity to destroy them. His ire rose when he looked down at Hannah lying lovingly on Jovani's chest. Soon she would be among the undead, and she too would be an enemy to his pack, and especially to Justin because of his lust for her. Killing Jovani wasn't in his plans. It was true that he was an enemy, but the werewolves had many enemies, especially man. Lycell didn't want to kill Jovani because he was a vampire, but because he stole the woman who his young son had picked to become his mate. The notion to kill Hannah had crossed his mind, as did many things, but he didn't act on them. The rules and principles of the Samsa pack were against doing this. Do not kill or harm the female of the species. It was the hunter's creed, and it was the Samsa's code which was handed down from their father's father. We need to leave now, Lycell said, his voice low, looking at Jovani sitting next to him around the fire. That is, if you can bear to leave her behind. What are you afraid of? That she's fickle, and will go off with the next man or vampire that comes her way. He taunted Jovani. Jovani had been used to the careless banter of Lycell. After arriving in the cave, Lycell spent the night with Jovani. In Jovani's weakened state of rest, Lycell could have killed him. He hinted that he could. It was to sow doubt and weaken Jovani's mind. But underneath, Lycell had integrity and honor, and Jovani recognized it. There had been honor among these killers. Watching at Lycell, the light and sound of fire crackling in the fireplace gave Jovani warmth of body where none existed, except that the only mortal who could make him warm stood inches away from him, watching at the werewolf and the vampire, not with disdain, but with sullen curiosity. How could these two find common ground when they are so different in ideas and purpose? Hannah thought. Looking at the man who would be her father-in-law, if she hadn't fallen in love with the one who would be her husband, ignited her curiosity about him. Jovani didn't say a word. His eyes wandered to Lycell, and then to Hannah, and then he strode in Hannah's direction. He reached out and gave her his hand, and she took it, and didn't protest as she had done earlier. Her eyes may have shown irresolution, but her body displayed heat and arousal. It was in her eyes. An attraction that would exceed any she or Jovani had known in the past. It appeared she didn't have the will to leave him or say goodbye to the one she had fallen in love with. Their love here between them proved too strong for anything to divide them. Gazing into his eyes, Hannah telegraphed that she was his. All his. He turned regarding Lycell and said, "I need to have a word with Hannah. Go on, Lycell, I'll catch up." And Lycell turned and stepped in the direction of the door, and once outside, he glanced back. He knew the sound of a man's voice when he was in love, but in this case, a vampire who never knew love, but had finally found the one person to share everything with. Lycell had felt that way about Justin's mother, and at first rejected the notion that he and his brothers share her, but they did, and now he had sons that will bind him to her forever, and he needed to find his last son. The one they thought they would never have. Once the cold air hit Lycell's face, he shifted into a large black wolf. He raised his head to sniff the wind, and dashed off into the snow in an eastward direction, where he initially found the plain wreckage. Watching at the large wolf disappear into the mounds of snow and pines, Jovani turned to Hannah. She needed answers, and she needed him to explain about Sasha, but Jovani didn't have that kind of time. He had to race the sunrise. Bringing Hannah to his chest, he placed his hand under her chin and lifted her face to him. Their eyes met. How could he leave her, he wondered. And how could he bring her into his dark world? A world he knew she couldn't survive in if he didn't turn her, and he wouldn't. He knew he had been selfish before. His desire for human blood had made him cold to all and everything around him. How else could he kill at will? How else could he look a mortal man or woman in the eyes, see their fear, hear their hearts beat hard and fast, and then sink his teeth into their veins and suck the life from them as they begged for their lives while he held them close and felt the warmth of their skin, and heard their last heartbeat, and when they looked into his eyes they saw their last night. "You have to stay here until I return," Jovani said, watching into Hannah's trusting eyes. "Don't go with anyone unless it's to seek protection. When I return, I will tell you everything about my life with Sasha, and I hope you understand. I will never love anyone the way I love you. Do you believe me?" Hannah took a moment, but she shook her head and said, "Yes." He placed his cold hands on the side of her face and leaned in to kiss her. She felt the hard pulse of his body on her. He felt the warmth and smell of her. It made him smile to think how she smelled the first night he came across her. She smelled of vomit and soap from her shower. Her hair smelled of flowers, just like that night when he first found her in an alley. He thought of the song that was playing by Sam Smith when he brought her closer to him. Stay with me, Jovani said. You're all I need. His blue eyes softened and shone bright as never before. Hannah smiled, remembering that night. That song rang true now more than any time. Jovani placed one hand on her silky hair and kissed it and smelled her skin. He drew in a breath. He wanted to taste her. How he wanted to taste her blood. He brought his mouth to cover hers and kissed her deep and longing. His hard, cold erection pushed into her, and then he pulled away. She stood close with her hard, warm young breasts pushing into his cold, hard body as they shared the same breath, as they shared the one heart, hers. His panting grew loud that even Lycell with his sharp ears heard him at a distance. Don't ever leave me. I couldn't live without you, he said clearly, as his hands left her face and neck and slid down her shoulders and rested on the tips of her nipples, which were covered with a thin piece of material. He felt the rise of her nipples like hard pebbles in his mouth. He wished he could nip her to smell and taste her sweet blood, but he couldn't trust himself. He couldn't trust that he wouldn't be tempted to feed on her. Jovani wanted that experience. But he hadn't fed, and he was thirsty for blood. Any blood, and that's when he knew he had to leave her. Brushing his nose against her neck, he took in her scent one last time and lightly kissed the softness of her skin, which only aroused him further. His breathing intense. He had to pull away, but he couldn't. The desire for Hannah was too strong. He felt his incisors elongating. He was losing control. The thin material she wore was all that separated the two of them. His body so close to hers where they felt as one. His body so close that he could have disappeared into her and lost himself forever, pushing deep into her sweet flesh and never coming up for air until he had devoured her. He felt her pulse, he felt her skin as he stroked it. The small bumps of skin rose and sent jolts of pleasure through him, as well as Hannah. He kissed her needy and excitedly, not wanting to leave, but knowing that he must. He kissed her trembling mouth against his hungry lips, knowing this may be the last time he sees her again, because he knew that if he were near and didn't leave, there was a possibility that Sasha could track her through him and find Hannah one day and kill her. Jovani kissed Hannah deep as her heartbeat throbbed against his chest and his manhood pulsed against her mound. He couldn't bear to leave her because he knew he would not return to her, to claim her, and make her his wife. She heard him say the words from John Legend's song, "All of me. You're my downfall, you're my muse, my worst distraction." He turned away from her as she held her outstretched hand, begging him not to leave her. He felt the warm tips of her fingers, and then he disappeared.